The rain had been falling since sundown, and Lena Ashwood did not care. She moved quietly through the wet forest, her boots pressing into soft mud, her basket half filled with fever bark and night moss. She knew these trees better than she knew most people. She had been walking this forest since she was 12 years old, when her grandmother first taught her which plants healed and which ones harmed. Back then, it had been a lesson. Now, it was survival. Lena was 24, and she was an Omega, the lowest rank in a world that sorted people by strength and bloodline. She lived on the outer edge of Veyrath, a highland territory governed by strict rules and even stricter silence. Omegas were not expected to speak unless spoken to. They were not expected to own land, hold positions, or enter the forest near the river after dark. There was a decree about that last part. A royal decree, signed 7 years ago by the Alpha King himself. Lena entered the forbidden stretch of forest every week. Not because she was careless, but because the children in her village kept getting sick, and no one else was going to gather what they needed. She found him near the river's edge, exactly where the water curved and the stones grew thick with green moss. At first she thought it was a fallen tree, something large and dark at the base of a boulder. Then she stepped closer and saw the hand. Then the broad shoulders. Then the blood, dark and spreading slowly across the wet ground beneath him. She knelt and turned him over carefully. The moment she saw his face, her hands went still. She knew that face. Everyone in Veyrath knew that face. It had been on the official crest outside the pack hall for 11 years. Sharp jaw, heavy brow, a scar across his left cheekbone that people whispered about, but never asked about directly. Kalen Voss, the Alpha King. Lena sat back on her heels and stared at him for a long moment. She thought about the decree. She thought about her family's name, which had been removed from the official pack record 7 years ago because of a decision this man had made from his throne without ever meeting them. She thought about her grandmother, who had spent her last years without the medical support she was entitled to, because the family name attached to her was no longer recognized. She thought about all of that. Then she checked his pulse, found it weak but present, and began to figure out how to move him. It took nearly an hour to get him to her shelter, a small, well-hidden structure she had built into the hillside 3 years ago, partly for gathering trips, partly because she liked having a place no one knew about. She dragged him more than carried him, stopping twice to rest, apologizing out loud once, even though he could not hear her. She was not entirely sure why she apologized, perhaps because even her enemy deserved some basic dignity. She worked through the night. 3 deep wounds needed cleaning and stitching. His fever was already climbing. She boiled water, prepared poultices, and worked with the same quiet focus she brought to everything. She did not let herself think about what she was doing or why. Thinking would slow her hands, and slow hands could cost him his life. She was not ready to decide yet whether she cared about that, so she simply kept moving. By the time the sky outside began to lighten from black to gray, the fever had not broken, but the bleeding had stopped. Lena sat down on the floor beside the narrow cot and let herself breathe for the first time in hours. She looked at him, really looked at him, in the early morning light. He looked nothing like a king right now. He looked like a man who had been through something terrible and had barely survived it. The hard authority that lived in official portraits was completely absent. What remained was simpler and somehow more unsettling. Just a person, exhausted and fragile, relying entirely on someone he did not even know existed. On the second day, search parties came through the forest. Lena heard them before she saw them, the sound of boots, the low calls between scouts. She stepped to the edge of the tree line and waited until one of them came close enough. "There's nothing here," she told him, her voice calm. "I've been out here since morning. Just me and my basket." The scout looked at her the way people always looked at Omegas, quickly, without much interest, and then away. "If you see anything unusual, report it to the hall," he said, and moved on. She watched them go, and then returned to the shelter. She did not examine what she had just done. She simply changed his bandages and put more water on to boil. On the second night, his fever reached its peak. He moved in and out of awareness, murmuring things she did not intend to hear. She kept her back turned when he spoke, giving him what privacy she could. But some things reached her anyway. A name spoken with tremendous guilt, something about a promise that had been broken, Something about a child who had not survived winter 3 years ago. His voice was different when he was not in control of it. Quieter, cracked at the edges. Lena had expected, if she ever thought about him at all, that his interior life would match his reputation, strong, certain, untouchable. What she heard those 2 nights suggested something far more complicated. She did not soften entirely toward him, but she stopped thinking of him simply as the man who had signed the decree. He became, instead, a more difficult thing to understand. It was on the 2nd night, when she was replacing the bandage on his left arm, that she saw it. She went completely still. On the inside of his forearm, beneath a deliberate old scar, was a mark. It had been partially hidden. Someone had clearly tried to cover it years ago, but in the low firelight, with the scar tissue stretched over it, the shape was unmistakable. An omega crest, her family's crest. The same one she had tattooed behind her ear, under her hair, where no one ever thought to look. Lena set down the bandage cloth very carefully. She sat with that knowledge for a long time, not moving, not making a sound. She knew what this was. Her grandmother had told her once, in the careful way she told important things, quietly, directly, as if stating a fact about the weather. She had said that somewhere in the world, a person existed who carried the other half of Lena's soulbind mark, that this was rare, so rare that most people considered it a myth, that the old texts called it a bond that formed before choice, before meeting, before either person had any say in the matter, that when Lena met this person, she would know immediately. Her grandmother had been right. Lena had known the moment she turned him over in the mud by the river. She had pushed the knowledge down immediately, refused to name it, told herself she was tired and imagining things. She was very good at refusing to name things that were too large to handle. But the mark did not lie. The recognition she had felt did not lie. She folded his sleeve back down carefully, finished the bandage, and said nothing. To him, to herself, to the dark and quiet shelter around her. She said absolutely nothing. On the morning of the 4th day, Kalen Voss opened his eyes. He was quiet at first, taking in the low ceiling, the firelight, the smell of medicine and pine. Then he turned his head and found Lena sitting nearby, mending a torn cloth with the focused patience of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She looked up when she felt him watching. "You're awake," she said simply. He tried to sit up. His body refused. He settled for propping himself slightly and studying her with the focused attention of a man who was used to evaluating situations quickly. "Who are you?" he asked. "Lena. How long have I been here?" 4 days. He absorbed this. "You found me by the river." "Yes. And you kept me hidden." It was not a question. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. She expected more questions, about her rank, her reasons, what she wanted in return. Instead, he said, "You must be tired." She blinked. Of all the things she had expected from the Alpha King, that was not on the list. "I'm fine," she said. He did not push. She brought him water and something simple to eat, and he accepted both without comment. The silence between them was not comfortable exactly, but it was not difficult either. It had the quality of a silence between 2 people who both understood that words could wait. Over the next 2 days, as he grew stronger, they spoke occasionally. Not about the decree, not about her family's name, not about what she had found on his arm, or what she felt when she found him by the river. They talked about small things, the forest, the herbs she gathered, the way the highland weather worked. He listened more than he spoke. She noticed that. She also noticed the way he watched her, not the way most people of his rank watched people of hers, as if she were furniture, useful and ignorable. He watched her the way someone watches a person they are genuinely trying to understand. It made her careful. On the morning he was strong enough to walk, she guided him to the forest's edge. The search parties had been circling the outer boundary for 2 days. It would not be difficult from there. He stopped at the tree line and turned to face her. "I want your full name," he said. Not a demand, but not quite a request either. Something in between, from a man who had not quite learned the difference yet. Lena looked at him for a moment. In the gray morning light, with the trees behind her and the open land ahead of him, they looked exactly like what they were. 2 people from very different worlds, standing at the place where those worlds touched. "You don't need my full name," she said. "I want to find you again." "I know." She held his gaze without flinching. "That's exactly why I'm not giving it to you." Something moved across his face, surprise, and then something more careful, more considered. He was not used to people declining him. But he did not look angry. He looked, if anything, more interested than before. "Then how do I thank you?" he asked. "You don't," she said. "You go back to your kingdom and you live, because that's what I kept you alive for. That's enough." She stepped back into the trees before he could find the words to respond. She did not look back. She had learned long ago that looking back only made leaving harder. Lena returned to her village before midday. She told no one where she had been. She put her basket away, washed her hands, and went back to the ordinary work of her ordinary days, checking on the sick children, restocking her supplies, mending the fence at the edge of the property. She was very good at ordinary days. She had built her entire life around them on purpose. That evening, she sat outside her door for a while as the sun went down. The sky turned the particular shade of orange and purple that only the highland evenings produced. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called once and went quiet. She had one thing in her pocket that she had not planned to keep. A small, smooth stone from the riverbank, pale gray, the size of her thumb, unremarkable in every way except that it had been lying next to his hand when she found him. She turned it over a few times without looking at it directly. She thought about the mark on his arm and what it meant. She thought about the texts her grandmother had described, sealed in the royal vault, read by almost no one. She thought about what would happen if the truth were known, the politics, the pressure, the way her carefully built invisible life would be taken apart and rearranged by people with far more power than she had. She thought about the way he had said, simply, "You must be tired," as if she were a person whose tiredness mattered. Then she put the stone on the shelf inside her door and did not touch it again that night. She was not ready to decide what it meant. She was not ready to decide what any of it meant. There was a secret folded up inside her chest, heavy and alive, and she had held heavier things before. She would hold this one too, for as long as she needed to. For now, she was simply a woman who had walked into the forest in the rain and found someone who needed saving. She had saved him. She had asked for nothing. And when morning came, she would wake up and do what she always did, quietly, carefully, without anyone noticing. That, for tonight, was enough.